that way. So, who owns them? Nobody. They're not property. They can't be bought. They can't be sold. They can't be traded. They can't be transferred. They can't be attached. And they can't be otherwise provided to anyone other than by policy. They're provided on a non-permanent basis for use. The IRs will provide them to Internet service providers, and the service providers in turn provide them to their consumers. Their consumers may be downstream providers, or they may be home users or corporate users. And they're provided on this non-permanent basis in a manner that's described by you, the community, through a technical and operational policy, which is what the AARN meeting is about later this week. And even though a lot of people don't believe this, when you're finished using the IP address, it comes back to the registry. Now, being finished using it means when a company is acquired, that IP address is not property. It doesn't transfer to the company that bought it. It has to actually go back to the registry. Or if it's a downstream provider, it could go back to an internet service provider. So, as a reminder, IP addresses by themselves do not disclose geographical location, who is using it, where it's obtained, or what it was obtained for. Now, some of this information you obviously can derive from directory services such as who is. But looking at an IP address, none of these things can be determined. So, a little bit on history and evolution. Like most everything else with the Internet, it all starts with this guy, John Postel, who, by the way, 6 years ago yesterday, he passed away. And so if you haven't thought about that, you ought to give it some consideration. John did an awful lot of things for the Internet, and I personally have missed him over these last 6 years. But let's go back to history and evolution. RFC 790, written in 1981, said if you want an IP address, send an email to John. He'll give it to you. That's exactly how it started and how it worked. This myth about John Postel having a notebook where he wrote stuff down is true. That's exactly the way it started. Of course, very soon John realized that he had other things to do besides manage handing out IP addresses, and so we had the beginning of the system of IP address management. Now, beginning in the early 80s, the Central Registry was formed, and this started out at SRI and eventually moved to Network Solutions. And it existed all the way up to 1997. The first regional registry was formed in 1992 as the RIPE NCC, followed shortly thereafter by the APNIC. AARN was the last major or big registry out of the original set to be formed in 1997. In fact, when AARN was formed, the Central Registry ceased operation. Then in 2002, LACNIC evolved as the fourth regional registry, and it evolved out of AARN. The fifth regional registry, which we expect to become operational next year, 2005, is AFRINIC, and is actually now currently being administered by RIPE NCC, APNIC, and AARN. One other organization from the IR perspective that's important is that over the years the IRs have found it necessary to work together to do things, many things, and also have found it difficult at times for people to go straight to the IRRs with something. For example, the IETF wants to do something and it wants to give it to the address registries to do. They didn't have anyone to go to. I mean, they could go to RIPE NCC and then RIPE NCC shares it, but the delegation would have been to RIPE NCC. They could have gone to AARN, same thing, blah, blah, blah. So what we did is that we formed this organization to take care of these kinds of things. And I'll go into more about the NRO later. And then lastly, that red bar on top indicates the beginning of the desire on the part of the United States government to get out of the Internet management business. And so ICANN was formed in 1999. ICANN is still operating under a memorandum of understanding with the U.S. government, and that expires, I believe, sometime end of 2005. So, if you look at the service regions, the four that are in existence today are AARN, which is Northern America, portions of the Caribbean, LACNIC, which is South America and portions of the Caribbean, RIPE NCC, which is Europe and the former Soviet Union and portions of the Middle East, and APNIC, which is Australia, the remainder of Asia, and Oceania. AFRINIC, which I show as a single service region, actually right now is divided in 3 pieces. The portion north of the equator is administered by the RIPE NCC, south of the equator by ARIN, and then those islands to the east of Africa in the Indian Ocean are administered by APNIC. The little crosses indicate where the headquarters, if you will, of the various regions are. ARIN is located very nearby here in Chantilly, Virginia. LACNIC is in Montevideo, Uruguay. RIPE NCC is in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. APNIC is in Brisbane, Australia. And AFRINIC is now incorporated as an organization in Mauritius, about 1,000 miles to the east of Africa. So, a little bit about ICANN, very little. What is it? It's a self-regulatory body is the simplest way to describe it. And what does it do? It's responsible for the top-level technical coordination of the Internet in regards to names, numbers, and root servers. It's not responsible for settling a lot of things that people wanted to settle or take care of, things such as dealing with spam and all kinds of other things, as far as making regulations for privacy issues and getting into real deep involved things in terms of intellectual property and things like that. Things that occupies all of its time, really. But that's what it's really supposed to be doing. What does it look like? It's basically got 2 sub-organizations. One is a set of supporting organizations, of which there are 3. The address supporting organization, the country code name supporting organization, and the generic top-level domain name supporting organization. Then there are a series of committees and task forces, and there are actually a lot more committees than what I show here. These are the ones that are advisory committees to the board of directors of ICANN. That's the At-Large Committee, the Government Advisory Committee, the Security Stability Advisory Committee, Root Server System Advisory Committee. And the last one is the Technical Liaison Group, which is really how the IETF interfaces with the ICANN board. And the Address Supporting Organization, what is it? It's really nothing more than an advisory body for global addressing policy. I will say this, there's very, very little policy that would be global addressing policy. I was 99.99%, somewhere in there, that vicinity of all addressing policy is actually regional in nature. And now it's coincidental that a lot of these policies are very similar and that the various regional registries have the same policies, but they may not have the same flavor of that policy. Everyone has a minimum allocation size. Everyone has a micro-allocation policy. Everyone has policies on how you deal with transfers and so forth. But these are all regional policies reflecting the regional needs of the ISPs in that region. And what does ASO do? Well, through its Address Council, it advises the ICANN board on policy matters. And the Address Council does 2 other things. It selects 2 members of the ICANN board of directors, and it selects 1 member for the ICANN NOMCOM, nomination committee. And it basically looks like this. There's the Address Council, which I just discussed. It's actually composed, and I'll go a little bit more how the Address Council is formed. And the Secretariat, which really is an operation that's funded and run by every year by one of the IRRs. So, Number Resource Organization, these are the 4 CEOs of the IRRs signing the MOU in October last year, in fact, at the last joint ARIN NANOG meeting in Chicago. And why did we do it? Well, we did it because we wanted to formalize our cooperative efforts. And we put the NRO together to do 3 things. We want to protect the unallocated number resource pool. In other words, that pool of addresses that's being managed by ICANN doing the IANA function. That is a single point of failure, and there certainly needs to be some mechanism in the event that ICANN can no longer perform that function. I'm not necessarily talking about ICANN going out of business, but it is in Marina del Rey, and they do tend to have earthquakes and things like that there as well. We wanted to promote and protect the bottom-up policy development process. What we don't want is a body to sit there and dictate to you, the users, what is the policy for how you're going to get IP addresses and what you're going to do with them. It's very important that this be an open and democratic process the way it has existed for years and years and years. And so that's another reason why we formed the NRO, to protect that process. And lastly, I kind of alluded to already, which is for the NRO, is acts as that focal point for Internet community to input into the IR system. So those are the three things that we formed the NRO to do. So what's it look like? Well, you can see the it shows up. The registries at the bottom. Solid lines for APNIC, ARIN, RIPE-NCC, and LACNIC comprising the current NRO. AFRINIC, when it becomes formally recognized, will join. It will sign a joinder to the MOU. The NRO has formed a executive council. The boards of each of the IRRs have identified and appointed to the executive council a member. It right now happens to be the CEOs. And in addition, the CEO of AFRINIC is a permanent member of the executive council as an observer, full rights to do everything except vote. The executive council is advised by two groups, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And we also have a capability of electing a numbers council. And it would be composed of 3 members from each region. 2 would be elected at large, and the third one would be appointed by the IRRs. Their boards would determine the process by which they would want to go through to select that person. Now, we're getting ready to, in fact, it's something else that, I guess it must be something in the air about ARIN NANOG meetings, but this Thursday we'll be signing another MOU, which will be the ASO MOU. And this is an MOU between ICANN and the Number Resource Organization. And basically what it is the NRO will operate and act as the address supporting organization. The Numbers Council will be transformed and will become the Address Council. And so the Numbers Council will not exist as an NRO organization, but will now exist as the Address Council for the ASO. So the members of the Address Council, who currently are all elected, will then change so that 2 are elected at large, the third coming from the IRRs. One of the reasons to do this is that there was no guarantee in the election, since we're going at large. Anyone that is physically located in a region can run to become a member of the Address Council. And so to make sure that the interests of the IRRs, particularly their members, is met, we decided it would be better suited that if one of those people really was there and knew what was going on. We have been blessed so far that generally the people that have been elected to the Address Council have an idea what address space management is about, but there's no guarantee that that would happen in the future. So, what's the NRO look like? It's got the Executive Council, which I already talked about, and the Numbers Council. There's also a Secretariat. Now, the Executive Council has formed 2 coordination groups, a Communications Coordination Group and an Engineering Coordination Group. I've already told you the Executive Council has appointed members by the boards. I've already described a little bit about what the Numbers Council, how it gets to be there. The Secretariat rotates amongst the IRRs, and there's actually a rotation order that exists. Currently, the chair of the Executive Council is a member from APNIC. The secretary is from RIPE-NCC, hence the Secretariat is composed of RIPE-NCC staff. The treasurer is from LACNIC, and ARIN this year does not have an officer position, and so we contribute goodwill and a lot of writing efforts. Now, these 2 groups are composed of the people from the various registries. So, for example, the Engineering Coordination Group is chaired by the Chief Technical Officer from the RIPE-NCC, since that's where the Secretariat resides. Then each IRR has appointed senior engineers to this group. This allows the IRRs, the group, to coordinate and do joint activities, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Similarly, the coordination group is chaired by the senior communications officer, or a person from the RIPE-NCC, and the communications type people from the other registries are participating in that. So, what does the NRO do? Activities. Well, first of all, the NRO supports ICANN. I've already described the Secretariat staffing, and I don't know exactly how many people that RIPE NCC is using to do this function, but we're talking about running websites, we're talking about running mail lists, we're talking about a number of things. The NRO contributes annually to the ICANN budget. Actually, to tell you the truth, that money right now is sitting in escrow. About half of it is. The other half we have over time provided to ICANN as signs of good faith that eventually we would sign an address supporting organization MOU. And who knows, this Thursday ICANN may get some more of that money. But we also totally fund all the activities of the address supporting organization. None of the money that is needed to operate the address supporting organization comes from the ICANN budget. None at all. And we also provide travel for members of the Address Council. It's a general rule that members of the Address Council will attend the regional public policy meetings for the region in which they were elected. In addition, the chair has to attend every ICANN meeting, and we also provide funding for the entire Address Council to meet face-to-face twice a year. The outreach activities are done by the Communications Coordination Group, preparing presentations and to be used, meetings with government representatives and industry groups, run the website like I've already said, and also to put out information in the form of press releases and so forth. The Engineering Coordination Group takes care of things such as the joint administration of the reverse DNS. Also, we're working on a couple of directory service activities. One is to put together a joint WHOIS, and the other is active participation in the CRISP working group of the IETF. And here's a sample page of the NRO website. It was designed by the RIPE NCC. It's actually a very nice looking website. So, and next year it will be maintained by APNEC. I don't think it will change as far as the presentation and appearance, but it's got everything. It's got a lot of things that if you haven't been there, you should go there, because it's got a lot of background information, a lot of documentation, and copies of the MOU that formed the NRO, and plus the document that's going to form the ASO. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the World Summit on the Information Society, and as soon as I finish this, I am done with high-level politics. Governments for a considerable period of time have been involved in trying to figure out what to do about the Internet. And as the U.S. government tries to get out of it, there are other governments that are trying to get into it. And so out of this concern arose an idea that there should be a World Summit on the Information Society. And as a result of that, through the years 2002 and culminating in December of 2003 in Geneva at the first summit meeting, 2 documents were produced: a Declaration of Principles and a Plan of Action. And the Declaration of Principles is just that. It is actually it's a pretty long document that describes the principles by which the summit believes the Internet should be operated and governed. And the Plan of Action is the means that they're proposing on how to get there. Now, nothing has really happened with either of these 2 documents, because we're actually now going into a phase 2. Now, the ITU is the one that basically sponsored the phase 1 of the WSIS. It's now been turned over to the United Nations, and the Secretary General has formed what is called the Working Group on Internet Governance. So, to your acronym bag, you now have WSIS and WIGIG. And the working group recently, about 3 weeks ago, they conducted a consultation in Geneva to figure out what it's going to do and to figure out who gets to be in the working group. Now, I attended that, and I guarantee you it's a lot of governments wanting to do a lot of things, and everyone has all the little pet things that they want to see done. So it's a lot of complicated things going on. So that Layer 9 is really getting worked over real hard here. And the outcome is expected in 2005 to have another summit in Tunis at the end of 2005. And so between now and then, there will be several prep comms, and actually the first one was held earlier this year. This next one is going to be in February, and the last one is scheduled to be in July. And where we go from there, it's anybody's guess. So, what's the plan? I'm not going to go through this. When you get to the web, when I get this thing converted to a PDF file, finally you'll be able to see this up on the website. I recommend that you do go, and I'll later on show you the URL for this website, to go look at this, spend some time reading it. I know the tendency of most people in this room is to say, it's politics, it has nothing to do with me. Well, believe me, it does have a lot to do with you, because this is going to influence the way you do business 5 and 10 years from now. And this is the thing that could cause a regulatory body to be created that's going to sit there and make regulatory decisions about how you do your business. So it really behooves you to pay attention to what's going on now and to make your voice known. Each of the IRRs is individually accredited to the WSIS process, and the NRO itself is also accredited to the WSIS process. So you do have a voice that can get into the doors and have meetings. Unlike a NANOG meeting or a regional registry public policy meeting where the door is wide open, anyone can come in and walk with a mic and say something, this doesn't work that way. You've got to be invited. And if you're invited, you have to have the right color of invitation to be able to really get up and say something. And so I encourage you very much so to check this out and pay attention to it. So, having said all that, what's an IRR look like? Well, it's a not-for-profit organization, and we don't charge for IP addresses. You may think so, but we don't. We're charging for services, and I'll detail these services in a while. And we also have open financial reporting. And if you're at the meeting on Friday, the treasurer of Aaron will get up and give a financial report. The budgets are available on the website. The past years are archived. You can go look and see how the money was spent. Membership, it's open to anyone who wants to get in. And become a member of Aaron and not receive any services at all, $500. But it doesn't guarantee you, if you pay $500, that you're going to get that /32 that you want to V6 space. It says that what you can do, which is probably more important from some perspectives, is that you can nominate and vote for members of the Aaron Board of Trustees and for the Aaron Advisory Council, the real governance bodies inside the Aaron region. And literally right now, there's thousands of ISPs, other companies, end user companies, and stakeholders who are members of the Aaron region. Later on this week at the Aaron meeting, Susan Hamlin, the Director of Member Services, will throw up a slide that's got the statistics of the distribution of members in the Aaron region. So I would hope you're here to see that. And lastly, as I've been harping on a little bit here, it's industry regulated. And it's regulated from the perspective that the executive board of any IRR is elected. And it's industry regulated in that members approve activities. Now, what does that mean? Do you sit there and vote on every time that I tell Leslie to go do something? I don't think so. What that really means is that you're the ones that create the policy. I don't make policy. The Aaron board doesn't make policy. Aaron staff doesn't make policy. And if you ever think we are, please let me know, because I will find out where the problem is. We don't make policy. We only execute it. We do what you tell us to do. Nothing more, nothing less. So those are the activities that you approve of. You're the one that also decides whether or not we should engage in some type of an activity. For example, about a year or so ago, there was some question that was being discussed about whether or not the IRR should hold a key signing key for DNSSEC, for the root. And we discussed that on a mail list and also in a public policy meeting. I can't remember when it was, a couple years ago. But in the end, the people in the Aaron region said, no, that's not a good thing for Aaron to do. That's not in what we want you to do. So we politely declined that invitation to do so. I will state that the same thing also happened in the other registries as well. But that's how members approve activities. And actually, that's how stakeholders approve activities, anyone is interested. So, services. What kind of services do we have? They're basically in three core categories. registry services, organizational services, and policy development facilitation. Big words. Okay, registry, these are the things that you're most familiar with. Allocation of IP addresses, allocation of autonomous system numbers, running directory services such as WhoIs and the Internet Routing Registry, and also running the reverse DNS. Organizational, these are things that are required for the organization to function. So we conduct elections. I'll be talking about elections shortly. We conduct meetings, and we're having a meeting later this week. In fact, we've been working very closely with NANOG to have this meeting, our third meeting, which looks to be a very, very successful one, more successful than the last two. Organizationally, we provide information. Put out a website, and every IR has a website, and every IR has a newsletter in some form or other. And lastly, all the IRs conduct training. So those are organizational activities that take place. Now, I said we don't make policy, but you couldn't make policy if you didn't have the tools to do so. And so the other services that the IR performs are those that will help you make policy. So maintaining the discussion lists, the email lists, archiving those things, conducting the policy meetings. In other words, going out and engaging a venue and coordinating to make sure you got internet service and get snacks in the morning and the afternoon and meals and just so you can kick back and relax, a social event. But all those things are part of a meeting and make a meeting an important thing to go to, and also make it a little bit enjoyable. Gives you a chance to network with your people that you normally wouldn't see on a day-to-day basis. And lastly, to facilitate policy development, the IRs publish the policy documents. These include two forms of documents. One is the actual policy itself, and the second is a procedural document that says here's how the policy is implemented. Now, in some cases, it's an actual procedural guide. In other cases, it's probably just detailed instructions on a template. And here is the house of IP address management. And IP address management is done in two areas, one through policy and the other through administration. And there are objectives to create the policies, and there are principles on how administration is conducted. Policy objectives we have to make sure they're adhered to, and the members make sure they're adhered to. We're worried about conservation, aggregation, and uniqueness of IP addresses. And under principles, the principles about the way that Aaron deals with the community is that we are impartial, we are neutral, and we are consistent. And the one thing that kind of supports both of them is both an objective from a policy, and it's also a principle of administration, is that we're fair. And if at any point in time, when it comes to administration of IP addresses, if you don't think that we're being fair, consistent, neutral, and impartial, I want you to personally send me an email, and I will personally deal with it. It's up to you to make sure that the uniqueness, fairness, aggregation, and conservation are taken care of in policy. I don't make policy, you do. So, how's it made? Well, there's some principles that we look at when we do it. One is it's inclusive. Anyone can participate in the discussion. I mean literally anyone. And you don't even have to be in the Aaron region to be involved in making policy in the Aaron region. You can comment from wherever you are in the world. And conversely, if you're in the Aaron region and RIPE NCC on their policy lists are discussing a policy, you're more than welcome to chime in and say something there. Same thing is true of APNIC and LACNIC. It's transparent. All the minutes of all the meetings are published, and they're published in short order after the meeting occurs. All the mail lists are archived. And if you want to see what a policy discussion was in the Aaron region 5 years ago, you can go to the Aaron website. And if you really like looking through email archives, I imagine there are some people that really do, you can see what happened. It's also transparent from the perspective that there are no closed sessions. All the email lists are open to anyone who wants to subscribe. Public policy meetings are open to anyone who wants to come to them. All policies and the procedural documents are documented. There's no secret hidden handshake deals that are made in regards to policies, no secret handshakes and so forth about the way things are done. And when you go to Aaron and you apply for address space today, and you talk to one of the IP analysts, and 2 weeks from now you go, you talk to Aaron again, you talk to another IP analyst, you will be treated exactly the same way, using the same procedures, because those procedures are documented, and you have the opportunity to look at them and see what it is. And lastly, policy development principle is bottom up. It's done by the community. It's done up. In other words, anyone in this room, if they wanted to right now, if they get on the public policy list and say, hey, I think Aaron should do this, and then a discussion would start. So there is a cycle to this, though. And first one is what I kind of alluded to already, which is a need has to be identified. Now, there's several different ways that needs get to be identified. One is by a change of technology. Another one is by a change in the industry. Those are two most common ones. It's then discussed. It's discussed in the mail list, and also it's then discussed in public policy meetings. And then consensus is determined. And the executive boards of the various IRRs are the final arbiters on whether or not consensus was reached. And then it's implemented. And it's implemented not only by the registry staff, but also by the service providers in that region. And then lastly, that policy is evaluated. It's evaluated both by the staff, and it's also evaluated by the community. Is it doing what we thought it was going to do? Is there an unintended consequence that when we put this policy together that we didn't expect to happen, and now it's happening? And lastly, has something changed that wasn't apparent before, which then, of course, will bring you back around the circle to the need. So that is really it as far as all the governance issues, policy development, and how things are done. But for those of you who think that I'm ready to say goodbye, not quite yet. First of all, I want to run through and show you what the status of the Internet number resources are as of the 30th of September of this year. These statistics are gathered by all the IRRs and are routinely put together in a presentation. IPv4 address space status. On the right, you see the IANA reserve, which is currently 94/8. And you see non-available space, the multicast, the private use, and the private data network. And over on the left, you see the allocated space. Who allocated it? You see about 94 of those were allocated by the central registry. Remember that central registry went out of business in 1997. So from 1981 to 1997, 94/8 were allocated. And beginning in 1992 is when the IRR started allocating address space. And you see not a lot of it has been allocated by the /8s have been allocated by the registries. Now, this indicates two things. One is that central registry space represents a lot of legacy Class A space, where you have some of the guys that first came in the door and said, I need an address, and said, okay, here, have net 6, it's all yours. Oh, you can have 23. And so you've got literally hollow amounts of address space sitting out there in those old Class A's. The second thing it represents is it's interesting to note is that the conservation principle being practiced by the IRRs, that space is very compacted. There's very little waste in that space that's been allocated by the IRRs. And what that makes that even more significant is that most, if not all, that occurred during the dot-com boom, when everybody was getting an IP address to start the ISP in their basements. And so there's probably more users, if you will, connected to the space that's been handed out by the IRRs as opposed to the space that was handed out by the central registry. Allocations from the IRRs, the LIRs, local internet registries, as they're called in some of the other regions, or the ISPs as they're called in the urban region. Yearly comparison, you can see that bars 99 through 2004 September, and the color codes are the various registries. Now, while the numbers may vary from region to region, if you look, the curves basically follow the same shape. You can do some connecting the dots of the various registries, which I think is an interesting phenomenon. And if you make that into a big pie and look at the cumulative total to date, you see that between Aaron, Ripon, ZC, and APNIC, they each have approximately a third of the space, LACNIC, being a smaller registry, has only 2% of the space. And looking at autonomous system numbers from the IRs to the ISP LIRs, yearly consumption, ARIN by far and large, in a way, uses a heck of a lot more AS numbers. And probably that's because multi-homing is a big feature in the ARIN region. It's not practiced as much in the other regions. And if you look at it from a cumulative total perspective, ARIN has allocated over half of the ASN numbers. Now, Dan didn't show up right. Anyway, the allocations of IPv6 to the IRRs is number of /23s. The big bars that are farthest to the right is RIPE and CC. They've got 23/23s from the IANA. The next one over, the smallest one, is from LACNIC. They've got 1. The ARIN region has 3, and the APNIC region has 4. So by and away, right now, the most IANA has given the most IPv6 space to the RIPE and CC. And if you look at it from a perspective of allocations from Pi, you see percentage-wise that this 58% of it is with the RIPE and CC. And we can't see this either. 32s. These are allocations that have been made by the registries. And the biggest chunk over to the right, RIPE and CC has given out the equivalent of 5,027/32s. LACNIC, moving to the left, is 10. ARIN, 107 3/4, and APNIC, 177.5. What we're doing there is we're also counting micro allocations, and ARIN has had a lot of micro allocations of V6 space to support infrastructure. And if you look at it from the IRs to the ISPs, LIRs, you can see the curve. And you can see those big, large yellow bars jumping up in 2002, 3, and 4 in the RIPE and CC region, which causes some people to say, well, gee, we have a foot race going on, and right now the Europeans are winning. Now, I don't think there's necessarily a foot race here as much as there's business decisions being made. And if you look at it from a cum total, RIPE and CC has handed out about 57% of the space. And if you look at it by economies or countries, the U.S. has 94 allocations of IPv6 space. So while the ARIN region has a relatively small amount, if you start stacking countries together, looking at it from a country perspective, the U.S. is the largest. And the Japanese, who have a national policy about IPv6, their deployment, are second, and so forth. Personally, I don't like this slide because I don't think we should be in the business of rank ordering here. I think we should be in the business of using it to the best common good. But there are some people that like to see these things, so it's up there. And I talked a little bit about Africa and what's becoming another registry. And from the perspective of the address space that's been allocated and administered by APNIC, RIPE, and CC, and ARIN, you can see V4 space, that 81% of it has come from ARIN for V4, and in AS numbers, ARIN has allocated 64% of the AS numbers in Africa, almost 65. And in V6 space, there have been 6 allocations, 1 by the RIPE and CC, and 5 by ARIN. And if you really want to do things with these things, the IRs on a daily basis update their registration statistics. And you can go to those websites where it says IR stats and download these things. They're in a file format that you can take, and you can spin it into whatever little analysis tool you want to come up with and win the Nobel Prize for deciding when we're going to run out of V4 space or so forth. Have at it. There's also stats available at the ICANN and IANA organization sites in terms of flat files that have got some statistics on the large allocations from the IANA function to the registries. So let's look at this week. Let's look at some ARIN services and activities as well. So first of all, I'm going to go through real quickly a quick policy review of the policies that are in existence in the ARIN region. The single home policy for ISPs, minimum allocation size /20. You got to demonstrate that you can use it. 80% utilization to get more of it, and you've got to report your reassignment information back to Aaron either via SWIP or through the RWhois servers, and you've got to provide utilization information. And you can get, if you can demonstrate an immediate need, you don't have to do a lot of other things, but you can get a /20 very quickly. So if that windfall opportunity arises, that you have now got this business opportunity and you're going to sell an IP service to these huge developments that are going all over Northern Virginia, bingo, you can get it. Single home policy for end users, again it's a /20. You got to just demonstrate an immediate need of 25%. Now we're talking about large corporations or universities that want to get space. Although one could arguably say these people are service providers too. However, I'm not going to get into discussion about what is an ISP, because every time that happens it's a big rat hole. And you have to demonstrate a 1-year projected need of 50%. Multi-home policy in the Aaron region, it's /22. It's the minimum size. It applies to both internet service providers and end users, and you have to demonstrate utilization of 23, and you have to renumber. V6 policy review, and currently the policy is minimum size is /32. There is no maximum allocation size, so if you want to come in and ask for a /16 worth of IPv6 space, and you can justify it, you will get it. Criteria, not an insight. You got to plan. And there's a key word here: plan to provide. A lot of people say, "Well, I can't get IPv6 space because I don't have 200 customers." Well, you got to plan to provide it, and currently you have planned to provide it to 200 end sites, 200 users in 5 years, and it also counts your infrastructure as well. So if you're going to have separate multiple data centers across the region, and you're going to do other things where you're going to consume the address space, you know, you've got 5 years to chew up 200 of these things. That's not a lot. I mean, actually, if you have a business, you only got 200 customers, it's a very small business. So it's not that hard to get it, to justify it from the perspective, because it is a plan. And you got a plan to provide IPv6 connectivity, and that's almost like a hello, you know. If you want IPv6 space, I would presume you want to provide IPv6 connectivity. So, microallocation policy, each IR has one. It's designed to provide infrastructure addresses for public exchange points, what the community thinks are critical internet infrastructure networks, and applies to both V4 and V6. AS numbers, you have to have a unique routing policy, and multi-home site is the other AS number, reason to get an AS number. Transfers. Now remember, way back, I said that you can't transfer numbers. Well, you really can't. What really happens, if you legally look at what occurs, is that the IP address space goes from, let's say company A buys company B. Well, what happens is that company A says, okay, company B, I just bought you, and I now own your customer lists, and I now own all your equipment, and so forth. And this equipment right now has got IP addresses on it. And sorry, those IP addresses don't go with the machines. They go back to Aaron. But what you really do is you say, hey, dear Aaron, I would like to use these same addresses if I could. So there's a transfer policy that takes into account that how this is going to happen. Because what you have to do is you come back to Aaron and say, I now have got all this equipment, all these customers. Here's my justification for the address space. So please issue me this address space. And because the community said, well, let's make it easier so people don't have to renumber. Aaron, what you do is that you say to the guy, okay, here's your address space. You give it back to him the same set of numbers, so he doesn't have to renumber. But legally what has happened is that number has gone from company B to Aaron back to company A. So although the term transfer is used, it's actually a return and a justification for new space. And of course you got to provide legal justification, and we have to verify that you're going to utilize them the way you say we're going to. It's not a hard process. Some additional services that are provided. Some of these are repetitive from what I talked about earlier, what IRs in general do. We also, and there will be I'll go into a little bit, a tutorial later on this week about cryptographic authentication. We've got documentation on our website, additional documentation. We now have V6 services for DNS, FTP, HTTP, and Whois via port 80. You can get bulk copies of Aaron Whois by filling out an AUP, and you get that via FTP. And our Whois is still alive and well. And we provide, actually Aaron is the one that produces the internet.arpa file for ICANN. It's not done there, it's done where we are. So, for example, when APNIC gets a new allocation of V4 space, we're the ones that have to change the internet.arpa file. That's just a holdover from the days of the central registry. Some active projects that we're engaged in with the other registries, DNSSEC for reverse DNS. I mentioned earlier we're actively involved in the CRISP working group, and our engineers are working on near term before CRISP gets out the door to put up some sort of a joint Whois. And ERX stands for the Early Registration Exchange Project. If you recall, I said the central registry went away. Well, the central registry allocated a whole lot of space. And a lot of that space was also in the RIPE and CC region and the APNIC region. Well, the people in those regions, if they wanted to make a DNS change, had to go to Aaron to make the DNS change, even though the registration record was in another registry. So it was kind of cumbersome. So beginning about 4 years ago, we said, well, let's change that. Let's make it so the ISP only has to go to one place. And so we have been moving these things, records around 1/8 at a time, and we are just about done. We are now into doing this with the records in the swamp. So it's been a long and painful process because there's a lot of notifications that have got to occur and so forth, but we're almost finished. So I think that is probably one thing that you could always point to and say, this is how well the IRs can work together for the good of the Internet. It's this project right there. Cross-registry, was it Internet or Information Service Protocol, something like that. It's kind of like Whois, but it's not a replacement for Whois. It's a directory service. There are several Internet drafts that are available if you go to the IETF site and look at that working group. It primarily started out in the names world, and from the addressing perspective, we were asked would we participate, and we thought about it and said, well, do we really want to get involved with the names people? And we said, well, no, we don't want to get involved with the names people, but we do think we need to participate because we got to make sure that something doesn't get implemented that could have an impact on us. So there are separate drafts or portions of drafts that deal with strictly the directory service aspect from an addressing perspective. Policy development, a little bit more on this. Basically, we do it the same way everybody else does it, open forums. And if you're one of the, I believe, 140 people that's registered for both meetings, and this is your first time to an Aaron meeting, welcome. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it, and I look forward to your participation. Our policy development is responsive. What you want is what you get, and sometimes you got to be careful what you wish for. Technical challenges in policy development. There's always a technical challenge. So there could easily be 2 or 3 competing technologies about how to do something, and so that argument will ensue inside the room. Now, Aaron has a very well documented Internet Resource Policy Evaluation process. It's at that URL right there, and in fact, I believe we have copies available in our meeting handout packets as well. So if you are registered for the Aaron meeting, in your handout, your packet, there is a copy of that process. And if you think that a policy has been moved through the process without following what's documented in this process, you must, and I'll say must, or you either contact me or you contact the chairman of the Aaron Board of Trustees, John Kern, and between us we'll see what really happened here and give you an answer, because it's very important to us that we follow this process. So, some milestones. Going back to those little things we talked about before, need. Okay, in the Aaron policy process, you got to submit it at least 60 days prior to an open policy meeting. And the advisory council of Aaron goes through and does an initial review and begins a discussion of it. And there's then a formal proposal posting 30 days prior to the public policy meeting. Now, the Aaron Advisory Council may after an initial review, come back and say, gee, there's already a policy that covers this proposal, and we'll say this shouldn't go forward, and we'll say so. Or they'll say that actually there's already a policy that deals with this, but this is a change to it, so maybe the author might want to consider changing the current policy or getting rid of the old one to implement the new one. So there may be some other things that have to be done. The language may not be clear, or maybe some convoluted logic there, but so the AC may decide, well, we need to work with the author of the policy. Or they say, hey, let's let it go and see what happens. So anyway, 30 days prior to the meeting is the formal proposal posting and numbers given to the policy proposal and so forth. Then at the open policy meeting, there's a discussion. Now, up to this point, there's been discussion on the mail list. And so now we have a face-to-face discussion in the policy meeting, and it'll be Wednesday and Thursday of this week. Then, based upon the discussions on the email list and on what occurred in the open policy meeting, the Aaron AC will meet this week, in fact, Thursday night, after the conclusion of the two-day public policy meeting, and do an appraisal about if they think there's consensus reached. And to assist in this, in fact, it happens at the public policy meeting, Aaron's staff provides a summary of the discussion of the email list. In other words, how many posts were made to the list by how many people and what were the general threads. So it makes it a little bit easier for you to look at it yourself and see what's happened. That's presented at the public policy meeting. This is also provided on a routine basis over time to the Aaron Advisory Council. So anyway, they appraise it, and if they think that there's consensus that this thing should move forward, they issue a last call for an additional 10 days, working days. And this is the last chance for people to say things, much similar to the way an IETF last call works. And then they can have a meeting, is generally a telephonic meeting, to review the results of the last call. And if after all this they feel that there's consensus that this should move forward, they send it to the Aaron Board of Trustees for ratification. Now, the board is not ratifying the policy. The board is looking at and making sure that the process was followed. And that the other thing they're looking at is to make sure that there's nothing there that's going to be damaging to the members. In other words, we don't want a policy that's going to cause Aaron to get sued, and therefore there's where all your membership fees went. It went to the pockets of the Aaron General Council. Now, they have a fiduciary responsibility. And also, they are going to look to determine and see to make sure that everybody that they could think of or should have been consulted on this process was consulted. And if all those things pass muster, then they say, here it is, the Aaron staff gets it, and the Aaron staff puts it into the process. Again, that's the URL for the policy process, and like I said, it will be available as a handout later this week. So if you haven't read this, go ahead and read it. And for those of you that like flowcharts, there is a real nice, complicated flowchart to go with this. You can spend hours going through it, making sure that there are no loops that you can't escape from, and so forth. So it's a fun game in the bar after about 5 years. So now we've added a few things to this. First of all, remember I said way back that the AC is going to look at things? Well, if the AC said, nah, we don't like this thing because it already exists, and so why should it be coming discussed again? The policy already exists. Or they said, well, we really want to work with the author, and this the author says, well, screw you, I'm not going to work with you. So the AC doesn't recommend that it goes forward. So the author can petition. And all the author has to do is find 4 people, from 4 different organizations, and it says, yes, we think this policy should be discussed. And there's a process to do that, and it goes out on a public list, call for people to participate, and the petition period is open for a period of time. And if 4 people say yes, then it goes forward and gets discussed. Now, after the last call, when the AC does their appraisal, and they say, well, we really don't think that this thing met the last call review, or we don't really think there was consensus reached to the meeting and the mail list, the author of the policy can say, well, I really disagree with you, and they can petition again. Now, the hurdle is a little higher here. Now you've got to find 10 people from 10 different organizations to agree with you to get this thing back into discussion. So if you can successfully petition, the policy stays there. So what that does, it says that the AC can't be arbitrary and say, well, I don't like John because he's the one, since I don't like John, I don't like his policy proposal. And so there has been, I don't know, how many petitions? 1? 2? One of each of them. And I can't recall the outcomes. Okay, 1 succeeded, and the last call one did not. Okay, so it works both ways. Now, the Board of Trustees has got a couple things it can do. One is, let's say that something happens. Well, the Board of Trustees can suspend this process. It's a short process that can be used, and the Board of Trustees says there's an emergency and we have to have a policy to deal with something right now. So there is a provision to get this thing done in a shorter period of time. Also, remember I said that the Board is kind of concerned about making sure everyone's voice was heard? Well, they have the capability also of suspending a policy. A good example is the virtual web hosting policy of year 2000, somewhere in there, 2000, yeah. Yeah, it was 2000, 2001. And a policy was passed in 2000 which basically dealt with virtual web hosting. Well, there were a bunch of guys that didn't participate in this discussion because they really didn't pay attention to what's going on, and these are the guys that run web services. And so they started coming to Aaron to get single IP addresses for each one of their web servers, and Aaron said, gee, no, you don't get that because this policy says you can do virtual web hosting. He said, well, no, we can't. And so the Board suspended the policy in September of 2000 and said, okay, this thing needs to be discussed more. Now notice I said suspend. They didn't disapprove it. They didn't cancel it. They suspended its implementation. It went back out for discussion, and so the following April at the San Francisco meeting, after having gone through mail list discussion and also through another policy discussion, the policy was implemented, but it was modified to work for the people that had objected to it. So that's a good example of how a group can be listened to. So I will also use this right now and say, you better pay attention to what's going on in WSIS, because you could be those web hosters if you're not careful. So some recent things we've added to this process in the next iteration of the document. There's now a mandatory requirement for the Aaron General Counsel to review every single policy proposal beforehand to make sure that there is a determination that you get to see where there may be a problem. And also, Aaron's staff is now required to provide an implementation analysis. You don't want one of the unintended consequences of implementing a policy is for me to go out and hire 20 more people. It's going to cost money. Or you don't want me to have to build a new equipment room to put in 10,000 servers to deal with this thing that you thought would be a nice thing to have. So that becomes part of the discussion set. And at the meeting later this week, you will see the results of those things and the policies that are currently under discussion. Lastly, well, almost lastly, policy manual. If you are a frequent user of the Aaron website, you know the Aaron policies are kind of like said this way and said that way, and some of them got numbers and some of them don't have numbers, and they're kind of hard to follow around, and you say, gee, those guys are really doing a good job of making sure I don't understand what's happening here. And so maybe they should get a pay raise for that. But anyway, yeah, we saw that too. The Board said, hey, this has got to be fixed. So earlier this year, the Board said, fix it. So Aaron's staff was given the task of taking all those policies, if you will, and collating and organizing them into a single document, if you will. And so there's a single manual. And so this now makes it easier for you to reference back and forth and find things. And it also helps to protect the integrity of the documentation itself. Now, just to make sure that we didn't change a policy when we sat there and did some editorial work on it, or we didn't write a new one, the advisory council was involved as well. And their job was to do, first of all, a review of the proposed structure of the document. And they did that and said, okay, this looks like a good structure, and that's what they recommended to the board, that the manual should follow this structure. Then, as we went through and made all those changes, the next thing that happened was that the advisory council, there's 15 of them, by the way, they broke into small teams, and they each took portions of the manual, and they went through and made sure that there were no changes to the policies as they were stated and then restated. So lastly, they met and they made that determination, and they recommended that the Board of Trustees adopt this. And so the Board of Trustees, at their meeting on the 29th of September, said, yea, verily, this is now the policy document. Now, all those other things that had been the policy document, they've all been archived. So they still exist. And if you want to go back and check for yourself, and I encourage you to do so, if you have any doubts, just go back and look. And if you think that in that editorial transition process some change occurred, please bring it to my attention. And last Friday we published that, and it is available also in your meeting packet. I said here in staff here, I actually would like to single out one person that actually did the bulk of the work on this, and that's Seiner Bolin. Island, raise your hand. He did an awful lot of work on this. Suffered a lot of grief from me in the process, but he did a good job. So, thank you, Susan. The active policy proposals. For this meeting, there are 4 of them. They are available for discussion if you want to look at them at those URLs. Our meeting, this is our 3rd meeting back-to-back with NANOG, and every year it gets bigger and better. And our public policy meeting is Wednesday and Thursday this week, and again, reminder, Thursday morning will be also the signing of the ASO MOU, and our members meeting will be on Friday. If you haven't registered already, you can register on site, and it's already too late to register today because they closed at 4, but you've got all day tomorrow, or actually only 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. tomorrow. And then Tuesday from 3 to 7. Although I'm sure if you miss those times and you want to register for the meeting, I'll take care of it for you, okay? Some outreach activities from the standpoint of training education. We're again running our registration help desk. There'll be hours when it's open. However, if you want to schedule a private appointment with the registration staff, there is an email address where you can send information to. In addition, Leslie, raise your hand. Director of Registration Services right there, so you can all gang up on her right now if you want to. She's shaking her head, but don't believe it. And she has staff here that, in addition to manning the help desk, would be glad to meet with you privately if you have something you want to discuss. And we've got some standardized registration training programs that are available online. And we are doing some activities with our news agencies, and we also are doing our outreach activities with people like the GSM North America Association. And believe it or not, from time to time, the phone rings and someone in the U.S. government asks me a question. So I do provide them with information from time to time as far as here's how things really are working. Now, whether or not it goes anywhere, I don't know. This is an election year, so they're probably looking for something anyway. We do have on-demand training. Registration process flowcharts. This enables you to follow through a flowchart and actually complete a template. And so you don't need to go to a special class someplace where you have to pay travel. You can go online and do it anytime you want to. And we also have a couple computer-based training courses, one on the ARIN database and templates, another one on how to use our Who Is. Mailing list discussions are on the public policy mailing list at ppml@arin.net. If you're not a subscriber, I recommend that you do become a subscriber. Elections. This time of year is when we have elections. We have one open seat for the Address Council of the ASO, Anyone that is an attendee of NANOG may vote on Tuesday, October 19th until 5 p.m. There's an on-site voting booth. I'll say that again. Anyone, NANOG 32 can vote for this person. And Aaron Board Advisory Council, there's 2 open seats on the Board of Trustees, 5 open seats on the Advisory Council, and the voting is open to Aaron general members in good standing only. So you have to be a member in good standing to vote. So this is one of those important reasons why, if your organization is not a member of Aaron, that maybe you should think about becoming a member of Aaron, because you can vote for these 2 very important bodies. The AC election, the incumbent is Eric Decker. His term expires at the end of this year. Term is for 3 years. It will begin on January 1st. The candidates' bios are at that ASO URL. The NANOG procedures for voting, you can vote online at that URL. The polls will open at 9 o'clock in the morning and will close at 5 o'clock in the morning. Your only eligibility is that you have to be a registered attendee of NANOG 32. And all we need from you is your first name, last name, and the email address that you used for your NANOG 32 registration. Remember, it's the address that was used for your NANOG 32 registration, not necessarily the one that you like. So make sure you know what that address is. So your participation, your involvement is the key. I've said that several times throughout the course of this afternoon. Go to Aaron's website. Go to the public policy mailing list. Announcements are sent out on the Aaron announce list. Go to the NRO website. And if you haven't done so, go to the WISIS website. So, time, if you haven't done so, register now for Aaron 14. If you're a general member in general good standing, the $150 fee is waived, and the registration services help desk is open on site during Aaron 14, as I said earlier. Participation this week, Monday night, 9 o'clock, is an Aaron Boff. This is where you get your opportunity to tell Aaron what you want. This has nothing to do with making policy or anything else like that. These are things that you think Aaron should be doing. And you don't have to be a member of Aaron to do that. Tuesday from 9 to 5 is voting for the ASOAC. Tuesday at 5 p.m. is a tutorial on Aaron's certificate authority. And so we have implemented this and people are starting to use it. And Tuesday at 6 p.m. is a policy proposal BOF. Now this is really a good opportunity. If you got a proposal, but you're kind of afraid to stick it up on the website, you can go to this BOF and you can throw it out there and see what people think about it. So you only have 10 people, 15, maybe 50 people in a room that are going to say something nasty to you, as opposed to several hundred people on the mail list. So it's actually a good chance for you to put it out there and see what the reaction really is going to be. And also, you probably are going to get some good ideas about how to make it just that little bit better, make it that much better for the rest of the people, because you're bringing to that policy proposal at the start is your perspective. And here's your chance to interact with people and get some other perspectives into that proposal. And so if you haven't done so, please register and attend Aaron 14. Contact information, there's the help desk. And during the days, Monday through Friday, it's open from 7 to 7. We have a billing help desk. We're the only IR that has one. So if your accountants are having problems, they don't have to talk to IT analysts. They can talk to other accountants and work out the bills. You can send email to our Hostmaster system, and we have a ticketing system for tracking things. And in general, just go to our website. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. I really appreciate your attendance and your attention this afternoon, and I'll open the floor up for any questions that you may have about anything I've said this afternoon. Susan. Yes. You can do it while you're sitting in the NANOG meeting and listening to a presentation. Yes. Yes. During my intro talk, you can go online, okay? When Susan's up there giving her intro talk, no, you shouldn't do that. Okay. Yes, please. Oh, no, you can't vote yet. It'll be open Tuesday at 9. Oh, the question was, you tried to get to the voting site, and he couldn't get there. Well, polls don't open until Tuesday. Okay, I guarantee you, if you try to go vote for President of the United States right now, those polls aren't open either. So, anybody else? Good question.
So, which internet registry handles space applications and addressing extraterrestrial?
Well, Vint hasn't gotten around to figuring out how that should be divvied up in the first place. And so I would presume that at some point in time we would have to figure out who's going to handle the address allocation for Mars. But we haven't really figured it out yet how to do it for Antarctica, so let's solve that problem first. Anybody else? Okay. Again, thank you guys very much. I really appreciate it. Please feel free to talk to me anytime during the week, or any member of the Aaron staff, or for that matter, members of the Aaron Board and the Aaron Advisory Council. There's about 20 Aaron staff here. Should be about 13 or 14 members of the Aaron Advisory Council, and all 7 of the Aaron Board members should be here. So we are ready and willing and able to help you and answer any questions you have. So thank you very much.